how poor the country really is. Now, what's important here is really to recognize the value of the insight of Dr. Chancellor Williams. Dr. Williams, in The Destruction of Black Civilization, I believe, had the best understanding that Kush came first, and then Nubia, and then Kemet. And Chancellor Williams lays this out. And there's nobody more important than Chancellor Williams in terms of doing primary research. In the 1950s, the great Chancellor Williams went to 26 African nations and did research among 105 different language groups to systematically study the old ways and the old culture. And what Chancellor Williams explains is that the vast Kushite empire, from that empire, Nubia emerged, and then Kemet also emerged. This is the larger context that we have to understand. So when we say classical African civilizations, we use the word classical instead of ancient because classical is more important. It's more valuable. So we hear about classical what? Classical art, classical dance, classical music, classical theater. So what does classical mean? Okay, you say stand the test of time? Yes. Something that has permanent and lasting value. Not always old per se, but classical means the paradigm, the model, the guide, the standard. This is what we mean by classical. It's the prototype. It's the example by which all other things are measured. And this is important that we use classical because throughout the Western world, there are classics departments. There's one right down here in UCLA, a classics department. The problem is these classics departments, they focus only on Europe. Two societies, Greece and Rome. They omit and leave out everybody else in the world. This is absolute arrogance. How are you going to have a classics department and then leave out everybody and then elevate Greece and Rome? There's classical traditions from different parts of the world. There's classical East India civilization. There's classical Mayan civilization. There's classical Chinese civilization. There's classical Islamic civilization. And there's certainly a classical African tradition that gets left out. How are you going to, it's academic fraud to call it a classics department and it focuses exclusively on Europe. Just be honest. Just call it the classics department of Europe. And nobody would have an issue with it because if you have the classics department of Europe, that means you have to have a classics department of Africa and other places. But students are misled in these classics departments around the world because they focus only on Europe. And there's nothing special about Greece or Rome. We hear about democracy coming from Greece, and yet 90% of the people had no rights in Greece. They couldn't vote, couldn't even own property, many of them. They weren't even considered citizens. Only 10% of the people were even considered citizens in Greece. And yet this is called a classical tradition. It doesn't make any sense.